All right, guys, with March Madness fast approaching, I thought I would go over some of the biggest choke jobs in recent memory by top seeds. These are top seeds losing in the Sweet 16, the round of 32, or the first round. And we're going to go all the way back to 2011. Ohio State, the God Squad, Thad Matta, 34-3 they finished. They were the number one overall seed, the number one overall team analytically. And you take a look at their postseason run. Oh yeah, this was the team that started 24-0 in the regular season, 11-0 in the Big Ten. They started against UTSA. They only allowed 46 points. Then they crushed George Mason 98-66, and then they lose to that Brandon Knight Kentucky team. This Ohio State team was number one all year. This was the year they crushed Duke at home, and they had four ultra elite players, four players with a rating above a 4. That's very hard to do, and that doesn't even include Aaron Craft and Deshaun Thomas. This was a loaded team that somehow only made the Sweet 16. This was a big disappointment. You could say, well, that was a really good Kentucky team. They were a 4 seed, but still, this team analytically all year, they should have won it all, at least made a Final Four appearance, and to not even make the Elite Eight. Moving on to the next choke, it is Missouri. Remember when Missouri was a 2 seed and they lost to Norfolk State? You know, it is tough when you have a team that normally is never a high seed like Missouri, and then one year they're randomly a 2 seed. They had a really good season, don't get me wrong, going into the tournament at 30-4 in the Big 12. They were still in the Big 12, so they were not in the SEC. They were 14-4. This was the last year they were in the Big 12, I believe, and they lost to Norfolk State in one of those crazy 15-2 upsets. Moving on, 2013 Gonzaga Bulldogs. Certainly you could make a case for a few different Gonzaga teams, but in 2013 they were a 1 seed and they did not make the Sweet 16. This was a Kelly Olynyk team, and you can see their run. This was a crazy game that I don't even remember. So they faced Southern in a 1v16 matchup, and they almost outright lost to a 16 team. Legitimately, it was a 2-point game with 3 minutes left. And then they lose to Wichita State. That was the year Wichita State went to the Final Four as a 9 seed. They lost by 6 points, but they had a really bad tournament overall. Because of the way the West Coast Conference tournament is formatted, they only had to win 2 games in the West Coast Conference. It's kind of weird. But in general, yeah, Gonzaga had a really bad tournament, almost losing to a 16 seed and then losing outright to Wichita State. Speaking of Wichita State, they started the year 34-0, and going into the tournament, they were 33-0. They were a 1 seed, and they did not make the Sweet 16 in 2014. Greg Marshall, his best team, or I guess you could argue this wasn't his best team. In terms of seeding, it was. You can see they beat Cal Poly in a 1v16 game, and then they lose to Kentucky. Everyone kind of knew Kentucky was underseeded. People thought Wichita State should have been in a more favorable bracket, but still, you start 34-0 and you don't even have a Sweet 16 appearance to show for it with Ron Baker, Fred VanVleet, the whole shebang. They can't even make the Sweet 16, although, again, Kentucky is a tough second-round matchup for sure. The next team that choked in 2015, it was Villanova. Under Jay Wright, the 1 seed, did not make the Sweet 16. Going into the tournament, they were 32-2 going into the tournament, 16-2 in the Big East. But you have to remember, the Big East went through a down period, so that this year, I don't think the conference was very good. They crushed Lafayette 93-52 in a 1v16 game, and then they lost to NC State by 3. That was a team with Josh Hart. Very big choke for Villanova there. And then looking at 2017 Villanova, a very similar situation, although this one in terms of their roster was much more catastrophic. So you can see, again, a 1 seed. They don't make the Sweet 16. Their tournament run, they beat Mount St. Mary's by 20 easily, and then they lose to Wisconsin by 3, so another 3-point loss. But take a look at their roster. Josh Hart, Jalen Brunson, Malik Bridges, Chris Jenkins, DiVincenzo as a role player. How does this team not even make the Sweet 16? It's one of the most loaded rosters that I've seen. What a bad choke from Villanova in 2017. Moving on to 2018, of course, we have to include the 1 seed losing to a 16 seed. Look at their overall like trend line. You can just see it go way down at the end. Yeah, Villanova. They did finish analytically the number 2 team in the country. Obviously a 1 seed going into the tournament. They were analytically the number 1 overall seed, and they just had a complete outlier. Like, look at on the far right all of the game scores. Their lowest game score, just looking at this, was 74. They lost an overtime game to Virginia Tech. Then their game scores 99, 86, 100, 83, 91, 99, 97, 98, 8 against UMBC. What a weird game that was. I kind of remember that game. It was very anticlimactic. Like, everyone was waiting for a 16 seed to beat a 1 seed, and everyone thought it was going to be some type of walk-off shot, and it would have been crazy. But Virginia just kind of folded in that game. Yeah, it was like a runaway win for UNBC. The problem with Virginia, they're so slow on offense and they're so offensively challenged. If a team kind of starts bullying them and making a few threes that they normally don't make and they get momentum, it's a big issue. And that's what happened to Virginia that night. The game started at like 9:50. It was really late. But yeah, there's another team that just choked. Moving on to 2021, so this was basically the pandemic year. 2020, the tournament was canceled, but 2021, it was when they changed everything around, and the first game started on Friday, not Thursday, and there was barely anyone in the stands. And Illinois was a 1 seed. I remember this vividly because, I mean, they did have 6 losses going into the tournament, so that's a pretty low 1 seed, but they did begin with Drexel, and they crushed Drexel 78-49, and then they lost to Loyola Chicago, only scoring 58 points. A 1 seed in the second round only scores 58 points. That is a brutal performance. Moving on to 2022, this is Baylor. So Baylor in the rugged Big 12 goes 14-4. They do not even make the Sweet 16. They were a number 1 seed. Taking a look at their run, yeah, they had a very bad close to the 2022 season. So in their first tournament game, they lost straight up to Oklahoma. Oklahoma at the time was kind of a fringe top 30 team. They did destroy Norfolk State 85-49, and then they lost to North Carolina in overtime. It is dicey, man. When you're a 1 seed and you face a blue blood that's an 8 seed, like Kentucky, Michigan State, North Carolina, you do, like, every time I feel like there's a big upset with these 8 seeds, more times than not, Syracuse is another one that went on a run. I know it was kind of a while ago, but still, you do not want to face these big name teams. And then, of course, we also do have Purdue, the other 1 seed to lose in the first round. This just recently happened. Fairleigh Dickinson, we remember it. You can see they did, analytically, they finished 7th, but yeah, looking at them, they won the Big Ten. They kind of had a fraudulent Big Ten tournament, though. I mean, they beat Penn State. I mean, Penn State was okay. They were like a 10 seed last year, but that's not the hardest tournament to go through. But they did win the Big Ten. And then you can see they lose to Fairleigh Dickinson, the 16 seed, ranked 264th. They lost by 5 points. They bullied Zach Edey, and no one else on Purdue really stepped up to do anything. And it was one of those games where if it's close towards the end of half, it's close midway through the second half, a lot of those Purdue players start realizing it. They get nervous, and it just makes everything worse. And that's kind of what happened. And then the final team I'm going to be talking about, it is 2022 Kentucky. They were a 2 seed. They lost in the first round. This was the run by St. Peter's. This might have been the first time I did a bracket where I filmed myself doing a bracket, and I remember saying St. Peter's is the worst 2 seed in the tournament. It's just a weird thing to say, and then, of course, St. Peter's goes to the frickin' Elite 8. But yeah, this was the Oscar Tshiebwe team, and I'm surprised he actually didn't come back for a senior year. I think he had 1 year of eligibility left. I don't know where he is. But either way, St. Peter's beat them in overtime. I mean, I guess it's not terrible considering St. Peter. No, it is terrible. I mean, even with St. Peter's going to the Elite 8, that's, you know, you got to beat a 15 seed. But either way, those are just some big-time choke jobs. That's going to do it for this video, guys. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.